Products podcast, a podcast by product managers for product managers. I'm delighted to be joined by an exceptional head of product and good friend, Kavya Kaushik. We're going to be focusing on a massively important topic within the product and tech community. Diversity in tech, is age inclusivity the final frontier? Everyone seemingly knows about health tech, fintech, medtech, and the list goes on. Why isn't there a name for a very important and specific demographic of our communities? We're going to dig into this and a lot more. Firstly, I'd love to introduce the most important part of the podcast, the guest, of course, Kav. Kav, tell us about yourself, what your current role is, and a general overview of your career and product so far.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited. Yes, I'm Kavya Kaushik. I'm currently head of product at the Joy Club, which is a really exciting tech startup in, I guess, the age tech space. But I guess that's what we're talking about is, do people know about age tech? But I've been in product for maybe about 8 years now, I believe, across a couple of different companies, starting in publishing, educational publishing, and then moving into travel and community. And that's some of the stuff that I'm doing at the Joy Club.
Amazing. And in terms of the challenges for the targeted demographic, discrimination in tech that don't have this particular sector that you operate in and the Joy Club operate within, there's obviously quite a clear problem that it doesn't have a sector name, that we know of fintech, health tech, as we discussed earlier, and as we introduced in the podcast. Why do you think that is?
I think there are multiple different reasons. I think the main thing that I tend to find within the tech community from a lot of people is just this, I guess, this sort of idea that people within our demographic don't know how to use tech. And, I hear this so often from people just, oh, well, if I think of my mum, that I have to help her set up a Facebook account better. And what we tend to forget quite often is particularly a lot of the people who are recently retiring and sort of younger retirees, they've been working, and you can't have worked if you don't know how to use tech very well. So we just have this huge community of people who are recently retiring, who are so on the ball with tech, but they are completely underrepresented or overlooked within the tech community due to a lot of stereotypes and connotations we have on how people respond to tech. And in my research and in my experience, they're completely unfounded. We've just got this community who really want to go and engage with products, engage with tech, engage with startups. But a lot of innovation is, I guess, being stifled within that sector. And that's really sort of what we're here to do and challenge.
No, it's some great points, because I know, when you look at some of the top startups and scale-ups that are operating in the capital, it seemingly is that there's a huge host that are targeted towards retirees or those that are nearing retirement, and it is at an all-time high, and these types of products and organizations are becoming more popular. I know you touched on that in that answer, Kav, but why additionally, what other things do you think that is, that popularity in organizations like the Joy Club?
Yeah, I think maybe the cat's out of the bag. I think people have kind of recognized and realized, and I think particularly if you look at London and some of the other sort of factors that are happening in London and the UK, around, I guess, things like aging populations, about sort of things like who owns houses in London. London has a housing crisis. So I think, I guess the cat's out of the bag, that a lot of people are coming to realize that there is this whole community that haven't really been targeted, who haven't really been thought of when we're building products. And a lot of different founders are trying to tap into them. I think the Joy Club's slightly different in that approach, because we weren't coming into this from a place of, oh, look, here's a place where there's a bit of a market gap. This is purely Hannah, our CEO and our founder. It's really mission-based. And the Joy Club is, I guess, a love letter to her grandmother and her relationship with her grandmother. And everyone who's joined has come with a very specific alignment to that mission and alignment to that purpose. I guess there are many different reasons. For some people, it may be around the market opportunity here, because this is an underrepresented community, and there is so much opportunity here to build something really exciting. For others, it's mission driven. And it is just the idea of being in a mission driven startup and trying to really make a social impact. I think another thing I've definitely noticed with a lot of tech friends has been, if you look at, I've been in tech and product, I guess, for 8 to 9 years now. And you saw this curve definitely in the last maybe 5 to 6 years, where Monzo exploded, Starling exploded, and everyone wanted to be in the next challenger bank, and everyone wanted to be involved in a fintech company. And what I'm definitely seeing is this shift now to sort of, actually, what are we doing here? What is the purpose of what we're trying to build? And an alignment definitely within the product community that is leaning much more into being in a more mission-driven startup and doing something that kind of will ultimately affect the sort of broader society and have a social impact. So yeah, there's different reasons. I think, I think there are lots of different reasons why. I would say personally, it's probably more the mission-driven piece that we're doing something that is really going to help people, and that definitely motivates me.
Cav, you touched on the importance of Hannah's journey and motivation for starting the Joy Club. Hannah, of course, is a woman founder and has been hugely impactful in the growth of the Joy Club. What's it been like working with her, and what's the importance of working with a woman founder?
Hannah's amazing. And I don't know how much of that is because Hannah is a woman and how much of that is how much the mission resonates with Hannah. The Joy Club was started because she saw the incredible retirement and the joyful retirement that her grandmother had, Granny G. And she wanted to really pay tribute after her grandmother passed away. And that is really the purpose of the mission, and really what kind of connected us all. For me, I had worked at a lot of different companies, a lot of different startups, and they were all amazing. But there was always, I guess I'd always wanted to be in a space with women. And not for any other reason. I think I do believe a lot in diversity and inclusivity. And I believe a lot in sort of making sure we're getting the right people in. There is something very different and special, I guess, with having a woman founder. And I think it is also just really important because when you look at the numbers, just how few startups in seed and pre-seed stage and even Series A have women founders. I don't know what the number is off the top of my head, but it is a very, very small number. And also, actually, then when you look at those numbers, the startups that are started by women have a substantially higher success rate. Now, maybe that's a data bias because there are so few that kind of get there, but they end up being much more successful because you've got smaller demographics there. But it does really make a difference. I guess in terms of those, it's something that resonated with me, and the mission of what we were doing for our users and our community really resonated with me.
So Cav, obviously with the past 3 years has been pretty manic with COVID, a lot of other factors influencing the global economy and just us culturally. There's been a huge prevalence in digital products. How can digital products benefit our communities?
Yeah, I think definitely post pandemic and during COVID, we've had a digital transformation which has really impacted a lot of that social engagement. So one of the things that we see, for example, is some of those stereotypes around digital engagement really don't exist because of how much COVID has changed things. So we've ended up in a place where pretty much all of our users and pretty much everyone I've met knows how to use Zoom immediately because of during the pandemic. There was so many, essentially all social engagement and all community was digital, and it had to be digital because everyone in the world was stuck at home. So I think there are pros and cons of that. I mean, I know personally, one of the things that's impacted me because of so much of my life being digital now and all of my communities being digital, during those 2 years, I ended up having, I guess, quite geographical agnostic friendships because you weren't seeing anyone down the road. Everything was online. So I've ended up in a place after the pandemic that all of my best friends live in Bristol on the other side of the UK. And I can't just message them and say, let's go for a drink, because over that time, it was just this idea of us all going, oh yeah, it's a Monday, let's do a Zoom call, let's maybe play some games and have a chat. And those friendships really developed in a way that a lot of my local friendships didn't, because those local friendships were so based around, hey, let's go for dinner nearby in an area that's kind of between us. And not everyone preferred that way of communication. So I think a lot of things have changed. I think there is importance and gravity. I think that's the word. There's a real gravity on product managers and the tech community now to understand how important community is, and to understand that the sorts of things we build and think about kind of positive and negative impact on society broadly, much more in a way that, this was obviously a conversation in 2016 with Brexit, Cambridge Analytica, all of that. I think that conversation is much more pertinent now on the sort of toxicities of digital communities, and the sorts of things that can cause challenges, and actually really cause challenges on our social fabric.
Yeah.
That needs to be factored in a lot when we start talking about digital products based around communities. Things have changed, I guess, and we really need to understand the nuances of that.
Because I know we've spoken a lot, haven't we, just on that with digital products, and I suppose specifically if we reference COVID around doom scrolling and just constantly having a feed of negative influences and, you know, negativity and things that aren't going to add value to our lives, whether they're activities or passions or whatever the case may be. And we've obviously discussed, haven't we, where the Joy Club can break that mold of doom scrolling. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's something we hear sometimes from our users, and it's useful because the Joy Club is a club to bring joy. So it's a really lovely
It's
community.
in the name.
In the name, there's some really lovely stuff we do, but there is this definite realignment, I guess, in a lot of social media products, and how, you know, particularly whatever's happening in the news as things are getting worse, as you're scrolling through different products, you're just seeing and hearing bad news. I think there's another problem actually about how much news and media has shifted into social news and social media. So before, you used to be in a place where if you wanted to hear about all the worst things happening in the world, you could just switch on the TV in a time slot between, you know, the 9 o'clock news, and just sit at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock and watch 30 minutes of the world is on fire. And now the way things have shifted is, I want to see what my friends are up to. I want to see what my friends' kids or my friends' grandchildren are up to. That, and here's all the terrible things happening in the world, are all combined into one place. There's also, I think, this other thing that I don't think we really appreciate, where before, where you had close friends or acquaintances or people you maybe didn't know as well, you wouldn't necessarily have them share their political views or their views on society as a whole, because that wouldn't be a conversation that would come up for a more casual friendship. And now you're sitting there in one place, looking at your social media feed, wanting to know what's happening in your friends and family's lives. And then here's an acquaintance you met 10 years ago and used to work with once upon a time, who's suddenly giving you their views on some really horrible events that has happened in the world. So there is definitely this doom scrolling, and I guess this unwanted doom scrolling, that you don't really have a space online anymore. You can switch off from that. It's every corner of the internet, or every corner of the social internet and digital products within communities, community-based products, where it's always there. There's always just an undercurrent of, this is a bad thing that's happening in the world. One of the things that the Joy Club does really, really well is it gives that nice break from doom scrolling. It is a place where you can go and, you know, connect and meet like-minded people, but not in a way where you're then also being reminded about this horrible war that's happening, and you know, not to say that you shouldn't be reminded of those wars, but it's just that there isn't, I guess, a break when every interface is telling you about it.
So during COVID, Cav, there was obviously, as we know, a huge rise, as we touched on, tech products, tech businesses. What really has happened within the past 2 to 3 years with COVID, tech within our communities? What do you think are the key takeaways or key learnings?
Well, I think from a user point of view, things have changed dramatically. A lot of the ways that people used to do certain things and how they used tech has just transformed. You know, I can't remember where I read it, but somebody had said the biggest digital transformation we've ever had in our lives was during COVID, because, you know, companies who had never ever wanted to be in person, companies who never ever wanted to have remote working kind of shifted to fully remote working. You had people who had never used Zoom before, who had to sort of force themselves to learn things like mobile banking, digital banking. A lot of those sorts of products and services across all demographics really, really shifted. And the key thing being the way we interact and build and develop friendship has really, really changed. You know, if I look at my family is from India, and I guess this wasn't exactly COVID related, but if I look at how my family used to interact with family in India 10 years ago, that we used to have a separate phone line in the house, which had a discounted rate that would call different countries, and had, you know, 1p per minute, 2p per minute, whatever, those slightly lower rates happening for international calls. And then that shifted to actually everyone uses Zoom, everyone uses WhatsApp or FaceTime. And definitely for me, I think what I found post-COVID, thinking about my family, was more connections with family who are based abroad and friends who are based abroad, who before I would see in person every year, every couple of years, and that would be the main times where we would have that engagement. We didn't have those barriers anymore. Actually, the only barrier ended up being time zones. So communities are not just kind of communities in the neighborhood sense. Your community now is so much bigger. The downside of this, though, if you kind of go back to doom scrolling, is I guess the bubbles, where you're no longer restricted by the community of your geographical location. You're restricted by the community of what is the sort of stuff that you are reading and seeing on the internet. If you're all on the internet, are you on this social media app that has this sort of algorithm? Are you actually not on social media at all, but you're sitting there reading online versions of print papers that have a slightly different narrative? So there's been huge changes. I think from a tech point of view, the changes, I guess we have that sort of initial pandemic VC funding where a lot of different companies got huge amounts of money. You had this whole advent of a lot of grocery delivery apps. And I wonder how much that sort of grocery delivery, instant delivery, has maintained post-COVID. It may not, I'm not sure. But yeah, a lot of different things changed in it from a tech point of view. And I think where we are now, sort of a few years later, is going from, I guess, that initial sort of surge of let's just look at funding all of these different things that look a lot of different digital and virtual experiences, to now, I guess, rehoning and looking at what is the right sort of thing that is going to work for the right sort of societal problems. But I think there's another challenge here, which is I don't necessarily know if everyone knows what the challenges are around digital, and sort of that there is one frame of mind, and this isn't just tech, this is actually a broader kind of everyone sort of has this problem. You've got one frame of mind, which is pandemic's over, let's go back to exactly how we were before. Got another frame of mind, which is pandemic isn't over, but we should maintain the exact same sorts of lives that we had during COVID. And where we are is actually somewhere in the middle, but no one's really defined that.
Yeah, massively.
Yeah,
massively.
hospitality.
And we've spoke about that, Cav. Sorry to interrupt, but on that, we spoke about that, didn't we? Where our behaviours have changed. And we had this chat, didn't we, before we even stopped, when we were planning the podcast, around how about going out for dinner. I'd rather stay in and order dinner than socialise with friends or go out, which is ludicrous when you think about it, isn't it? Like how our behaviours have now changed to that. But that is, as you said, that is very much the inner battle that we're sort of and that's, you know, across a whole different range of decisions and activities.
Yeah, definitely. I have a home gym now. It's not this, and I actually got that after COVID. So I didn't have a home gym during COVID because the gym equipment was too expensive. But now that is definitely a behavior that's changed for me. Was my routine changed, my structure changed because I wasn't commuting that much. So I had an extra hour in the morning. And I now use that to do weights at home. That's not a thing I would have ever even thought of doing before. My house looks so weird with lots of weights and gym equipment and the sort of stuff that I probably shouldn't, but it just feels more adapted to my life. I think, yeah, on the restaurant topic, that's a really, really good example, because hospitality is one industry that has really, really changed. And I don't know if there's a reluctance maybe to recognize that, or if it is not a reluctance, it's just we're still finding our feet to understand that. But I did quite a bit of research around different hospitality trends. And one of the things that I found was pre-COVID, you used to get a lot of people who wanted to go to bars or restaurants nearby their place of work. So from a sort of urban and I guess suburban split, you were finding in urban city centres that pre-COVID there was a lot more foot traffic. There was a lot more people who were going there because it made sense to go for something after work. What's changed now is this real shift in culture where people are more likely to either order in or go somewhere which is near walking distance from their house. Now, because of a housing crisis, that means you don't really live in a city centre. Yeah. So a lot of those sorts of suburban venues, they're getting a lot more footfall and a lot more business. But the idea of spontaneity has also therefore gone, because less people are kind of sitting in an office on a 9 to 5, finishing at 4, going, I've had a rough day, let's go to the pub, let's go for dinner, I need to go and have some social interaction. Because you need to do so much forward planning for anything. I definitely find that very frustrating when meeting my friends, because you can't just kind of have a spontaneous, let's just go and hang out tonight. It needs to be scheduled. There's so much admin involved in just meeting friends these days. And I just don't know if I don't know, if that's a universal thing across every community in every country. I don't know if there is a problem here that tech can solve. But I think there is definitely, we talk a lot about tech being a very adaptable and agile sector. And quite often I feel we're not adaptable and agile enough to understand exactly what has happened here. It's sort of, as I said, the two extremes. We've got people who are like, we're fully remote now. Everything is just like it is at COVID, or we're never leaving the house. And actually there's a nuance in the middle. And something else that I found at the Joy Club is we have a very interesting new user base where COVID really changed a lot of things, with a lot of layoffs, with a lot of changes to ways of working. We have this whole generation of people who I guess have a reluctance to retire and a reluctance of retirement, and a few people who were forced to retire during various COVID-based changes that happened, or even post-COVID, where there's been, recession and financial changes that have happened in the economy. And that is, I guess, the most interesting segment of our user base, is this sort of people who have retired but didn't want to retire. And they're, I guess, transitioning to retirement. And they're trying to find out, what do I do now in this new stage of life? Because I have so much to give, I have so much interesting stuff, and that was sort of cut short suddenly. And what is my purpose and what is my fulfillment? That is, I think, the most interesting problem, and that is what I think is I guess a real shame within the tech community, that we're not all kind of getting behind, going, hey, we've got these really, really interesting users. What do we do for this audience here, and how can we kind of bring out the best for them? The other last thing I'll say on that is, one thing we find very interesting, or I definitely find very interesting, is this societal perception that people who retire are sitting at home and not doing anything. And the number one thing I hear from users is, I'm busier now more than ever that I've been retired. I've spent my whole life doing this thing, and now I'm learning this, and I'm doing this, and I'm hanging out with my friends, and I've started singing, and it's this really beautiful stage of your life that you suddenly have access to. And actually, it's so much busier and so much more fulfilled than I think we really understand and give credit to. And that's one of the most exciting challenges that I get to fix.
No, I bet it is. And as you said, it is such an important thing, isn't it, when you get into that retiree age, and that fulfillment and sense of meaning? Because I mean, and again, going back to the COVID conversation, that's one of the biggest things socially people had taken away from them, was a sense of meaning, a sense of routine, a sense of structure. So, the evidence, as we know, is so imperative around how important that can be. So it's amazing what you and the team are doing at the Joy Club, and it is so important. And I want to gravitate, Cav, if we can, to more product focused questions, because I know there'll be a lot of listeners who are either potentially, well, I hope a mix of different product managers, midway contributors, managers. And I know, Cav, in your career, you've obviously worked in a whole host of different environments. Smaller and larger teams, what are the different challenges within product?
Yeah, that's a great question. You have so many different challenges there. It also, I guess, depends on the age of the company. So what you find, let's say this is a larger company, it's a company that's larger or mid-sized company, but it's been around for a while and it's trying to make the shift into product. And that is it's a very interesting and exciting job, but actually so much more of that job is around stakeholder management. And it's so much more about getting people to understand and agree with your vision, to move from being a potentially sales-led environment to suddenly becoming more product-led. There is a little bit of tension occasionally, particularly for people who sort of haven't understood or had any exposure to product, and sort of what is the purpose of this. I've always found that the job that you do as a product manager changes so much at a lot of different companies that you're at. In some places you're a project manager, and particularly in a lot of those larger sort of recently having a digital transformation or moving into a product-led organization. That is, sometimes that is a lot of, well, you're clearly here to project manage. I think once I was asked to fix the printer, and I said, sorry, I don't know how to do that. And they said, surely you're the IT project manager. I was like, okay, right, let's dissect that one. So it differs a lot depending on where you are, what the sort of audience, what the culture has been before. It's a really exciting challenge there. I think it really suits people who are very much people persons, I guess. People who are really good at kind of going and influencing people and persuading them and talking about things. The other challenge, though, you get from that environment is there is a lot of process. and innovation can sometimes take a bit of time, particularly if you're looking at multi-market companies, because you then have to do things like, okay, we've got this, a great example of this is, hey, we've got this experiment, and instead of getting engineering to build it, I've got a third-party tool which I know will fix it, will get us to test whether this is a good assumption. Let's bring that forward. To get that done at a larger company, again, depending on the company and their sort of processes, a new tool means you need to go through the whole IT information system architecture to see, actually, does this tool have this? You have to go through procurement to see, do we have another tool that does this? You also have to go through budget approval, which then is a couple of other layers, and then compliance, because you need to go and get your privacy policy.
There's a trend developing here, I think.
Yeah, which, and as I said, that is fine if you really like that. For me, I personally feel much more adapted to startups, because I can go, oh, I've got this idea. How do I build this idea? Listen, there's this product tool that does this. And you still have that conversation, but there are fewer people to have that conversation with, so you can get that approval very quickly. The downside of being at a startup, I guess, it's not for everyone. You can pivot so much. You can start off with one product, decide it actually doesn't work, you've got to pivot the entire product. So if you are, for example, if you go, I love marketplaces, and what I want to build is a marketplace product, and that is what my experience and my passion in life is marketplace. You go and build a marketplace product, it doesn't get traction. You go, okay, do you know what? We can't do marketplace. We need to actually pivot straight to full e-commerce. Once you pivot to full e-commerce, you need to have that sort of right agility to be comfortable with that pivot. And you quite often get a lot of, some people can be quite discomforted by that. It's uncomfortable to suddenly go, but I've put all my passion and love and hope into this beautiful thing that I've been doing. I've spent the last 6 years building this, and it's actually, being okay with that. From a management point of view, one of the things that's very difficult for that is hiring people with that right mindset. And I quite often find when hiring in startups, I care much more about mindset rather than track record on these sorts of things. People who are okay to flip the switch and actually, we're not doing this now, we're going to do this now, and be feeling comfortable with discomfort, I think is probably the biggest challenge there.
And I mean, in my job, I suppose talking to hiring, that's quite apt, I suppose, Cav, talking to a recruiter about that. But one of the biggest challenges when I'm speaking to candidates, especially those looking to want to make the jump from a contributor role to a head of or a strategic role, is there's a lot of rhetoric that gets, chucked around, like, I want a role that's got more strategy in it. But, what does that actually mean? Like, how do you articulate? I mean, in your experience as someone who's done, has made, obviously, the progression into a head of product role, what has been the biggest challenge going from a contributor to a head of?
I think it really, really depends on the company, to be honest. And I also think what product does is very different in different environments. For me, it was staying in one SME, and I guess staying there and being promoted gave me a lot of those skills. And then I had an amazing, amazing manager and mentor who then gave me that coaching around how, developing the strategic skills correctly. If you're in a larger company, quite often a head of product role is more of a line management role. You're sort of doing you have a big team and a big squad of people who are sitting under you who really need that development, that progression, understanding those frameworks. So if that's something that you really enjoy, that is fine. But then you may not be doing a lot of the nitty-gritty, and you kind of get into this quite bad cycle of then, right, things change, you need to move on, but a lot of those day-to-day kind of producty jobs that you used to do, you haven't done because you've been so focused on higher level stakeholder management, line management. For, I guess, the big difference, if you are going from an individual contributor to a head of product at a startup, is you would be doing both of those. And that's where my preference comes, is doing head of product at a startup, because you're never really then losing the skills of how to product manage, because it's less of a line management job. I mean, it's still there, but it depends.
Yeah.
You might be, I guess the only real difference between a product manager and a head of product at a much smaller company where you're the only product manager is the job title, maybe a bit more experience, because you're actually probably doing the same thing. And yeah, if you're a company of, let's say, 7 people and you're the first product hire, you are both creating the product strategy and also doing all of the tickets, and also working on the user research, and also working on the design. You're doing 100 different things. So I guess I guess the challenge really depends on where you are.
Yeah.
If you're going head of product in a larger company, the challenge is probably much more line management and being comfortable with difficult line management situations.
Yeah, and I suppose it just comes down to, doesn't it, like what exactly do you want for your next role or career choice? It ultimately comes down to preference fundamentally. And I know there was obviously some great takeaways there, Cav, but I suppose just to wrap up on some of these more product-centric questions, what specific advice would you give to someone who wants to progress into a head of product role?
So I think the advice has to come from having a think about, where do you flourish better? Is it a large company, a mid-sized company, or a small company? Wherever you are, whether it is the same company that you're at, the first place I would say is getting that development within your role. Identify, and it doesn't need to be your direct line manager, but identify someone within the company who you believe would be a good mentor. And no one ever gets offended if you reach out to them and say, hey, can you mentor me? It's a lovely thing to ask someone. So don't feel scared. Let's say you're an associate product manager and there's a sales director, and actually the role is nothing to do with sales. Product and sales being quite different, but there is an understanding of commercial viability there. Or you want to move into a technical product role and you see somebody maybe in the engineering team who'd be a very, very good mentor. Approach them, understand what it is, and kind of have a think through sort of what is the sort of role that you want and what are the gaps that you have there. So as I said, if it's a larger company, then what you need to do is maybe have a look at some of the head of product, some of the line management side, stakeholder management, find the right person to help you develop those and try to get those skills within your role. I think it's probably more difficult to go from, I'm a product manager who's been at this place for a short while, to now the next role is going to suddenly be a head of product. I think those roles need to be developed and defined within that company. If you're in a startup, I think it's very different. So if you don't have a lot of other people in the company, it's much more, I guess, about feeling comfortable experimenting. So to move from an individual contributor to, well, you'd still, I guess, probably be an individual contributor at a startup, but it's really understanding and developing the skills around how you're measuring success. I think every time I have spoken to someone about a head of product role, what they care about isn't, can you write tickets and manage a cross-functional team? It is much more, is the thing that you did it drive impact? Can you demonstrate to me how you drove impact? So it's making sure that you are thinking about that with everything that you're doing. Is, what is the success metric? What happens if this works? Thinking about experiment frameworks and delivering it that way. What I'd say is be very careful. Be very careful if you're an individual contributor who wants to progress to a head of product role, that the role and the skills that you're doing at your current place are product, because as I said, some places may have you doing much more program management or project management, or I guess sort of like an agile scrum product role, which is potentially not going to set you up for the skills that you would need to get to as a head of product. So if that is the case, find ways to upskill in that within your current role.
Some really good points Cav made on the product-centric questions. I think there'll be a huge amount that people can take away from what you've discussed there. Now, to wrap up, obviously, the podcast, we wouldn't be doing ourselves justice if we didn't come back onto the main theme of what this podcast is around, which is ageism in tech. Cav, where is the future of product in age tech within our communities?
I'm slightly biased here, but I do believe the future of age tech is the Joy Club. We have got just some of the most exciting people, and this audience is just so exciting. These are people who are happy, they're joyful, they're busy, they are online, and they're looking for that next exciting chapter of their lives. And I believe quite strongly that that is the Joy Club. It's what we are building is the go-to home for people in later life, in retirement, who are kind of coming into this chapter and looking for something to build. So I think it is us. I think outside of us, there are some really exciting startups. And I think people are really getting to understand just how much of an exciting opportunity this is. There are a lot of different places we can go to. I think the main hope I have, having spoken to our users and really understanding sort of some of the problems and challenges within the community, is that tech companies don't approach it in a patronizing way. And I think that's where some of the challenges have been in the past, where you have these products and they, I don't know if you've ever watched The Apprentice, but there are old episodes of The Apprentice that always make me laugh about this, where they have to do something for the over 50 segment. And when you've got younger people, and people in tech do tend to be a lot younger, they just immediately start thinking about, like, you know, his little old lonely person who's sitting in their house with a dog. And that's not the case at all. You know, these are really, really young people, and they just have such a different perspective on life. And I think the biggest challenge is if we continue to see older people in that way, if we continue to build tech products that are ageist and don't factor in just how much of an exciting chapter of their lives this is, then I think the future will be amazing. But I also have confidence that the Joy Club doesn't see our community like that. So I do think the future is with us and what we're building.
No, and like you said, Cav, it's such incredible work that the business are doing. And look, all businesses that are operating in that sector, you know, all of us have got, if we're lucky enough and blessed enough to have people, you know, grandparents, elderly parents, parts of our family that we all need to take care of, and ultimately enjoy their company and enjoy these activities. And like you said, have that joint enjoyment collectively, and not you know, don't have those stereotypes, negative stereotypes that have been in the past, which obviously, you know, you're breaking and doing such great work. Cav, where can people find more about the Joy Club? Where could we direct them to?
Yeah, we're at thejoyclub.com. So that's where you can find out about us. We also, if you do have someone in your life you think would benefit from joining, you can sign up then and there on the website, and there is a 30-day free trial. So yeah, but pass it on and let some special people in your life get access to it, and I'm sure they will enjoy it. We've got a bunch of really exciting things that they can engage with, join, read articles, watch some recordings, join some live classes, and really just develop and sort of be in that really great stage of their life.
Cav, thank you so much for taking the time to obviously have this chat with me. You're always a pleasure to deal with, and yeah, thank you so much. And from my side, we'll look forward to welcoming a new guest soon on the Product podcast. But Cav, thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.